Welcome to the May 12th meeting of the Board of Correction. I'm Stan Brezanoff, the very newly minted chair of the board, and I'll ask the board to introduce themselves in a moment. But first, I'm going to exercise the great power that this chair has and ask that they improve the air conditioning, cooling of the auditorium, if that's possible. Bring the temperature down a bit. I think everyone, starting with me, would be appreciative. Please introduce yourself.
Derek Cephas, Vice Chair.
Jennifer Jones-Alston.
Bobby Cohen.
Marianne Hamill.
Michael Reed.
So as I noted, my newness, we have a very full agenda this morning, and I'm going to give only very brief remarks. First, I know we have all been anticipating a petition from the Department of Correction in regard to, among other things, the visitation process and some other aspects of the department's operation. We have not received that petition. It will not be on the agenda for any kind of consideration today. I do know that the Commissioner plans in his remarks, his report, to talk about elements, substantive elements of his thinking in regard to the petition, which obviously, once we have, we will be sharing very widely, but not for today. In that regard, the item 6 on the agenda that you have, the petition from the public advocate in regard to PREA, and let me start out by saying we applaud and support the intentions of the public advocate, but there are segments and substance of that petition that require additional review and consultation, and we are deferring action on that petition. We anticipate we will be having discussions with the public advocate, with the city council, with the Department of Correction in the coming days. It is certainly an important subject that warrants our sooner attention. And finally, as we move the agenda along, we will certainly have time at the conclusion of the meeting for the public comment period. We're going to move to the committee reports. The first one is the ad hoc violence committee. Oh, while Dr. Cohen is going downstairs, I've been reminded once again, a reflection of being freshly minted, we must approve the minutes. If I can have a motion.
Moved. Seconded.
Any corrections, changes, amendments, and so on? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimously approved. Dr. Cohen.
Yes, so good morning, everyone. The Ad hoc Committee on Violence currently consists of myself and Derek Cephas. I'm presenting a report based upon some studies that have been prepared by board staff and 2 visits that I made to Rikers Island. I don't know if it's possible to change the lights during the presentation in terms of the photographers. Is that what? You can take this one off? so people can see it. I just want to first thank the staff of the Board of Correction, who were tremendously helpful. The staff and volunteers of the Board of Correction tremendously helpful in the preparation of this very sketchy report, including Jim Bennett, Ashley Denverno, Che Park, and Laura Limuley. They have been spectacularly helpful. And to move it, do I have to press this, or do I have? Yeah. Okay. So, the first, all of you have seen this. I don't know, the Board of Correction, using data provided by the Department of Correction, reviewed slashings and stabbings and weapons, and the weapons that were found and the weapons that were used in these events, and found that 80% of them were constructed on site. Next slide. And as you know, Commissioner Mark Peters previously presented a report showing that that there is a serious problem in contraband, both drugs and weapons, entering the facility. There have been many arrests. I would not be surprised if there were additional arrests in the near future. I would say that the department has a plan to address this. We haven't seen the results of that plan yet, nor have they. But it is a very significant area of entry of contraband into the facility. So the first 2 points I want to make are that 80% of the weapons that are found on Rikers Island are made of elements that are found on Rikers Island. They are not brought in by correction officers. They are not brought in by civilian staff. They are not brought in by visitors. The next item I'm going to talk about is lockdown. There have been several prolonged lockdowns of prisoners on Rikers Island in the past year. In GMDC, and Brianne, Judge Hamill will be speaking more about the consequences of that lockdown and other issues in GMDC during the adolescent presentation. But young adults, during the period from March 25th to April 14th, these are 18-year-olds, were locked down 21 to 22 hours a day. There was no due process. They were not accused of doing anything. They were just locked down by the facility. And the Board of Correction was aware of this. The Board of Correction wrote a letter to the department putting them on notice that they were in violation of our standard 1.05 that says every prisoner has the opportunity to lock out of their cell up to 14 hours a day. And despite that, the lockdown continued for over 2 weeks. So during that period, these 18-year-olds were denied recreation, visits, and access to telephone calls, and access to their personal property. I saw their personal property locked away in a closet that included their personal pictures, their legal papers, and this was a specific policy of the department during that period. This is the second violation of the 105 that the board has raised to the department in the past six months. The other one was in TRU and RNDC. We've talked about that publicly with the commissioner at this meeting. It's a bad practice, and our standard is quite clear that we think it is wrong for prisoners to be locked down, and there's a rule that says that they have the right to lock out of their cell every hour if they want to, up to 14 hours a day. This is not visible, but this is a memorandum prepared by the warden of GMDC to First Deputy Commissioner Zarenda, which describes the process of limiting the amount of time people will spend out of their cells. This was prepared on March 25th and was posted throughout the facility when I visited 5 days before the lockdown was ended. There had been an increased use of lockdowns on Rikers Island over the past year, and certainly over the past 6 months. I don't know I hope you can see this. This reports September of 2014. There were a total of 64 lockdowns of the facility or units. In October, there were 72. The number of hours of prisoners locked down, that's an estimate that we made. Sometimes the department says how long a housing area is locked down. Beginning in April, they have not reported how many hours an area was locked down. We made an estimate that it was till the end of the shift if they didn't describe an end to the lockdown. The hours were 8,000 approximately in September, 10,000 in October, and in April of this year, up to 18,000. So the number of hours of prisoners being locked down in their cells has doubled over the past 6 months, and this is a policy decision of the department. One of the problems that caused the lockdown, we believe, and this has been reports that we've gotten from field staff, is that there has been a problematic policy and practice in terms of ending lockdowns through the chain of command. I've been informed by the Department of Correction that this has been resolved, but we will see. Again, these slides will be available. What this slide shows is that the amount of contraband that comes into the facility. I can't see that at all from here. So, can you? No. Well, this is actually available. I believe you can find this data yourself. But what it shows is that in 2014, that the number of weapons that were found on prisoners following visits, and there are many ways to analyze this data, but I'm just going to use the way the department presented it to me on request. That there were that in fiscal year 2014, there were 7 weapons that were found following a visit. 7. This is out of hundreds of thousands of visits, and that there were 23 findings of drugs following visits in 2014. So 7 weapons and 23 drug findings. And fiscal year 2015 to date, there have been 4 weapons. This is out of approximately 300,000 visits. Fiscal year, 231,499 visits so far this fiscal year, and the numbers, there were 4 weapons found so far and 19 drugs found. I think this data suggests that the conveyance of contraband into the facilities is not substantially related to visits. I'm sure the department has a different approach to that, and we look forward to discussing that with them. Derek Cephas and I visited the facility, multiple facilities on Rikers Island last week so we could better understand how visits worked. And it's obviously a giant procedure, having 300,000 people a year coming to visit Rikers Island. What we found, we were trying to understand how the process worked, where it worked well and where it didn't work well. We were expecting, as you know, reports, a petition, and we're interested in its function. So we noticed the following: that there were no steady officers at the visit house. We were told this by the department. All visit that people come on Rikers Island on a bus from Queens and then come to a central visit house. There are no steady officers in that central visit house. Every officer is on overtime. They've served their shift and then they're doing additional time. That sometimes the shifts are not filled. That there are 4 officers in the K-9 unit, which the department views as critical to its contraband discovery process, which are not filled. The fluoroscope machine in the central visit area has been broken for the past month, so that's not available to find contraband. And the central visit package room, which we visited, is serving multiple functions. It's very crowded. It's where pat frisking takes place in the central visit area, and it's also used for storage of packages. And additionally, the central visitors who come into the central visit area or who are not going onto Rikers Island, who are coming to pay bail or pick up their properties, are also go through the same visit process, which I would think is inefficient. Perhaps the department has a way to do that, but it uses a limited staff for this purpose. Strollers are not permitted at visits. They're kept in a stroller area out and not allowed to be brought into the facilities. There are lack of steady posts or COs in the visit areas. There are no body scanners, and one question that we're concerned about is whether or not the department has applied for a waiver from New York State to bring back this equipment in a safe manner. We have not had a chance yet to look at the wait times for the entire visits. We also observed contact visits in GMDC and AMKC and in OBCC. A particular of note is that in OBCC, CPSU, the Central Punitive Segregation Unit, the place where the department keeps those people who are in punitive segregation, have contact visits. They have areas where their families can come. They're observed. They're not required to be in booth visits. We saw this functioning was very smooth and great to see families and visiting their loved ones. There was no problem with visualization. There were multiple discrete areas. Visitors could speak with each other privately, yet there was full observation by corrections. At GMDC, one of the things the department we understand is proposing, but hopefully it won't, because of the discussions that we are having now and will have, is to create plexiglass barriers between visitors and their and the persons they are visiting and prisoners that will block their feet, and also have a plexiglass barrier that will prevent physical contact except for a hug before and after the visit. In GMDC, there are tables which are structured where the bottoms of the tables are blocked, so there's no contact with the bodies below the desk, but there is no plexiglass barrier above the desk. I observed that, Derek Cephas observed that. We haven't heard the department's response, so that seemed perfectly adequate in terms of the ability to prevent certain contraband transfers that would not be visible, and certainly provided a reasonable visit setting. No problem with replacing that with the current small chairs and tables that are available. The non-contact visits, our observations were different. I don't know how many of you have seen non-contact visiting on Rikers Island. I visited it about 5 years ago. I have not seen it since, but I can assure you that the quality of the visits in the non-contact or booth visits has not changed. The plexiglass is still scarred and very difficult to look through, and it is very difficult to communicate with someone on the other side of that plexiglass. The systems in place for air transfer of sound were certainly not adequate for me in most cases to hear the person on the other side. And the department's desire to expand this is something that we have to look at very carefully, because it doesn't feel like a visit. During the first 9 months of this past fiscal year, the department's own data shows that the number of visits per person has gone down, that the number of contact visits, the rate of contact visits, of visits being done has gone down, and the rate of non-contact visits has gone up. So one way of understanding this is to look at the current system as decreasing access to contact visits and discouraging visiting on Rikers Island. I am concerned personally, and this is not a report of the committee, that the proposed changes will accelerate this process. This data will be available to everyone. What it clearly shows is that the rates, you can see here that the rates are 19.62 for contact visits per inmate per year as of March of 2005, and they previously were, they'd never been that low before. Last year they were from 23 to 20, but now they are now they're in the 19s. These are rates, so it takes into account the decrease in the population on Rikers Island. So there have been an increase in lockdowns. Visits are being discouraged, and as we'll hear, there's been no effect on violence in DOC facilities. Prisoners are locked down at 9 o'clock. They lose access to telephone calls in the morning. The number of hours prisoners have been locked down has doubled in the past 6 months. There have been extended lockdowns in violation of our standards at GMDC and RNDC in the past year. The rates of visit and contact visits are down. The rates of non-contact visits, booth visits, are up. These may be linked. I don't know if they are, but they may be. Weapons found in Rikers Island are overwhelmingly made in the jails or come from correctional staff, and we're going to continue our process of review of the visits. And I'd just like to say personally that the culture of violence deserves all of our attention on Rikers Island. That in terms of some of the issues raised here, enhanced staffing and adequate scanning equipment should be employed to make the chances of conveyance of contraband into the facility as low as possible. Using technology and correctional staff to have enough time and the right equipment to screen people. But that the friends and families of men and women in Rikers Island are not the cause of violence. The contact visits are not the cause of violence. Booth visits are demeaning, and their use should be circumscribed, and the consequences of mass incarceration are many and brutal. Visiting should be supported, not demonized, and visitors to Rikers Island should be welcomed, not humiliated. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from board members?
Thank you for your work on it.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
just,
It's really the staff.
yeah, I'll just say I accompanied Dr. Cohen on that visit, and his views are consistent with mine with regard to those very issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give a brief Adolescent Young Adult Committee report. I know we have a very full agenda, and the department will be presenting more comprehensively later this year. But as you know, Commissioner Pond has convened what's called an Adolescent Advisory Board, which meets weekly. It's the Department of Correction, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Department of Education, Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, many advocates, the Board of Correction. And it's essentially a very collaborative approach to policy and practice that's affecting the adolescents and young adults. Obviously, it's advisory, and the Department of Correction ultimately makes the decisions, but there's a lot of collaborative effort. You'll hear later that there's some young adult programming and planning underway to be able to end solitary confinement for young adults 21 and under. In the new year, there have been a number of problems that I have been able to raise with the department in this forum that get addressed much more quickly as a result of the collaborative effort that the commissioner has created. So I thank him and his entire team for these collaborations, and all of you who come to those meetings, because I think it's helping to make Rikers a very stronger and more secure place. Certainly in terms of the programming, the aspiration, we don't know whether we'll accomplish it, but the aspiration is to try to program 80% of the youth and young adults about 80% of the time to make a calmer, less violent, and more productive time for the young people when they are incarcerated. Now, I will talk to you about a couple of the units and a couple of the problems. RNDC in general, the True and the Second Chance Housing Policy Directive has not been finalized. It is something the department's working on in collaboration with their advisory board. But we all know that there is a Department of Justice lawsuit that is being negotiated, and so the department, it's my understanding, wants to be sure to incorporate any of those issues in terms of settlement into the policy. Some of the areas right now that are being worked on has to do with the de-escalation area and also due process. Depending on what the policy results in, I understand there may be a basis for rulemaking in this area. I can tell you, because I visit it regularly, the True Unit and Second Chance Housing units are working very, very well. They're functioning well. There is no use of de-escalation right now until that policy is in fact approved. I will tell you that we have noted, and I know there's a petition for PREA that's been filed by the public advocate. I know we'll be deferring on that, but I should tell you that certainly over the year and a half of being on this board, I have noted a number of PREA violation problems, including commingling of 16 and 17 with older inmates, including having adult suicide prevention aides in the housing units and the like. Generally, when I spot these problems, I notify council to the Commissioner Heidi Grossman, and she resolves them relatively quickly. Part of it is knowing what the problems are. There was a recent one that was picked up by central office staff when she was out doing a site visit, and that included around visiting, where the adolescents were in a waiting room with the adult inmates. I think we have about 1,000 adults in RNDC, where we have about maybe a little bit less than 200 adolescents. So that waiting room did not have direct supervision of an officer. And under PREA, there has to be separation of sight and sound in any of the housing. And should there be commingling for services and the like, then there has to be direct supervision by the officers. There was not. I immediately notified council, Heidi Grossman, and she immediately rectified that by having a third officer. So I think what it to some extent brings up, ideally would either like to have the adolescents off Rikers, or if they're going to be maintained and housed in Rikers, to have the to have the adults moved out of the facility, because there's just too many opportunities I see from my vantage point to have PREA violations. But I know that's something we'll be talking about. In terms of GMDC, you heard Dr. Cohen talk about this lockdown that occurred. It was a direct lockdown, and then it was a modified lockdown for a few weeks. That's one of the units I've been trying to monitor fairly closely. It's an administrative segregation unit for 18-year-olds. And what I learned is that, and I don't know at what point this occurred, but certainly a few weeks ago, what I had learned is that there was a blanket policy imposed on that unit of 18-year-olds that have been segregated for alleged dangerousness and disruption of no contact visits whatsoever. So there was plexiglass, no contact visiting booths that the young people, the 18-year-olds, were visiting with all of their family and friends who would come. And I also learned that there had been a change in policy in which there was no longer any congregate recreation. So the 18-year-olds were essentially being put in very small cages, not being able to socialize when they were recreation, notwithstanding the fact that they were in the housing unit together. Obviously, both of these would be a violation of our minimum standards. Immediately notified council when I learned about this, and Heidi Grossman and I both went to the units to speak to all the young people, verified that in fact that had occurred. And I must tell you, I don't know why. It appears there was a decision at a jail level with no authorization by the commissioner, but it immediately ceased. And congregate recreation was reimposed, and the construct for the no contact visiting was removed. And so there is now contact visiting. But what I think is particularly significant is this is the unit where we've seen escalating violence. And this is the unit where they've been doing the lockdown. So I think it's very important that we track compliance with the minimum standards, because we don't know what the relationship is between failure to comply with minimum standards, increasing anger and frustration of the young people, and therefore perhaps some acting out and some violence. This was the unit. They've been able to manage the unit very well without locking them down and by giving them the congregate recreation and the visiting. And since visiting is an issue, I should tell you that when I went to visit last, the plexiglass had just been removed, and one of the 18-year-olds said it was so wonderful to finally be able to touch and feel his mother again. It had been a long time since he had had that contact, and he was very pleased by it. The unit was calm after this was removed. We know that pursuant to the regulations, the city can mix the 18s with the 19, 20, and 21 years old. It's my understanding they're waiting to do so, to have the programming in place to make it thoughtful and deliberative, and also to have the video cameras, because some of these units still have no video cameras. Based on the spot checking our field staff have been doing for us, we know that recreation has been, the utilization of recreation, and perhaps even the affording of recreation, has been low. It seems to be attributed to being offered very early in the morning, as well as for in this unit, it wasn't congregate, so the kids they want to go play basketball. They want to do, a large muscle, big type of exercising, not just working in cages. And it also appears because there's an overlapping services are offered. So although the services might not be may all be afforded, they can't possibly do them all at the same time. So they need to be separated in terms of how they're offered. That said, it seems to me it's really incumbent that we work with the department to develop a systematic electronic monitoring of compliance with the minimum standards that aren't dependent on the logbooks and all the paper and whether it's written down or not. So at least starting in the segregation units like TRU and the 18-year-old unit and ESHU, I understand they've just started it, to make sure there is compliance, because that could in fact, first of all, it's our standards and we're going to ensure compliance, but two, it may very well be related to rising tension in the jails if there is a failure to comply with, certainly with some of the significant ones. You all may or may not know that Vera is now working with the department regarding safe alternatives to segregation. They presented to the Adolescent Advisory Board and informed us that just in general, administrative segregation in general correlates with increasing violence. And so Vera will be working with the department, and we'll be very curious to see what the ultimate plan is to minimize the reliance on segregated units. I also think that ultimately we have to improve the general population. So there's the conditions of general population are better so that there's less reliance. And I know the commissioner and his team are working very hard on this, but obviously a lot of it is about obtaining the funding. So if I can just call on Deputy Commissioner Saunders to, she's the chair of the Adolescent Advisory Board. If you can just briefly address the department's plan, because we know we have the rule in effect, and I'm sure my colleagues in the public would like to hear in terms of the department's programming and housing and timeline for ending solitary for 18 to 21-year-olds age group.
So good morning, everyone. So I think you pretty much covered it, Judge. But basically, the young adult plan is underway. We understand that we received some of the funding we requested from the mayor's office. We're sorting out the details. Once the details are sorted, we'll be able to decipher the next steps and provide an update to our adolescent advisory. And I believe that we're on track to end punitive seg for 2016.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
questions? By any of our colleagues? No? Thank you so much, and
Thank
thank you
you.
again for the collaborative efforts that you run for the Department of Correction and all of us.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Judge Howell. These reports, these two committee reports, point to a number of continuing issues that we at the board will be engaging with the department on. And I think that we will make an effort to track them from meeting to meeting, to report on the process of interaction with the department to mark progress or to mark where we deem there has not been progress. I know that to the degree possible, the commissioner in his updates will address, at least in part, some of the issues that have been raised. But the key here is that since there's rarely a magic bullet, a button to push for these things, that we will need to engage with these in a continuing and systematic way, and that will be reflected in our discussions at the somewhat unusual board meetings in that respect. Yes.
Just I just want to commend both Dr. Cohen and Judge Howell here. The fact that you were able to get Commissioner Heidi Grossman to so immediately resolve that issue, which was just basically a rogue employee not complying both with standards and with policy, and get it fixed and help people is a big deal. Good stuff.
Thank you, Mike. That brings us to the department's updates, and again, I know the commissioner will be covering some of the issues that, at least in part, that have been raised. And also, I think he intends to talk a bit about the department's continuing efforts in the area of PREA.
Morning, everyone. So the first item was enhanced supervision. I think everyone's aware we have 2 units open. Neither one is fully, while they're fully staffed, we do not have a full complement of inmates in these units at this point in time. It's a brand new program. We started in late February. We wanted to make sure staff and the inmates are in place and the programs are happening like they should, and that there's merit and value to what we've instituted. I think at this time, I believe they're functioning as we believe they should. We've had some minor incidents in the unit, but in general, I think they've operated well. We're on target to open a 3rd unit, I believe, at the end of June. So. 3rd unit will be brought online. I think as we talked about this when we discussed it with the board, we indicated at the time we would house about 250 inmates in the status. As we roll the program forward and look at how it's operating and how, I think as Judge Hamill pointed out, how the rest of the population is acting, maybe there's not a need to go with 250. So I think a careful, thought-through rollout of who's there, how the unit's operating, is it having the impact that we believe it will really dictate numbers for us. The 250 was a number that we really wasn't a full guess, but at least a projected guess based on the violence that we were seeing in our facilities. Any question on enhanced supervision?
Commissioner, how many people are have been assigned to it currently?
I think we're about 60.
Okay.
About 60, yes. So it's about 30 in each of the 2 units that we have open. Anything else? Okay. So I want to kind of just briefly cover kind of where we're at today in the agency. So we have a few slides up here. So talk about the...
I apologize, Commissioner, just on ESH. There's a 45-day review process in ESH where people who are confined there can appeal the decision to have them placed there every 45 days. And the basis for the appeal is any number of things. One of the things that it includes is their participation in programs. It's our understanding from staff that in the 3rd floor unit that there were not access to programs. And so people there could not say that they could not show their participation in order to support their appeal. Could you comment on the availability of programs in the units at the present time?
No, I'll let Deputy Warden Kelly talk about that. He was directly responsible for the opening. It is a engagement of programs. Is one of the metrics that we use to see how the inmate's behavior has changed in order to make a decision on to either release or retain in the unit. Like anything new, we've added programs and put programs in place as we open these units. So if there are programs available.
Good morning. Robert Kelly, Deputy Warden assigned to oversee enhanced supervision. In terms of 3 West, we know 3 West, that unit opened April 6th. So there was a transition for the staff and non-uniform staff with the new opening of the additional unit. So for the first few days, the programs that were afforded downstairs were not initially afforded, but at this time, all the programs are the non-mandated programs as well. Have been afforded. There are selected dates for certain things with outside vendors that are coming along. So everything will be running as a mirror as in One West. So that does go in part of the 45-day periodic review, yes.
Thank you.
I actually have a question. Are you tracking participation and compliance with the individual inmates in the programs? Because a part of the 45-day review includes a review by the adjudicator as to what that participation has been to help determine whether they're ready to move out of ESH. It seems to me we need to be able to track individual inmates. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the report by our central office staff demonstrated that it's not being tracked individually.
Yes, we do track the inmates as they do participate when the class is given. There is a sign-up sheet. But when I do the review, I also interview the inmate as well to even ask as far as the participation that the inmates are being involved. They're brutally honest. Some saying they are participating, some are not. And I'm also have a rapport with the uniform and non-uniform staff to validate whether or not they are participating. So we are able to track it, and we are able to have a comprehensive review when the 45 days are up for that particular inmate. Just a second point in terms of the program that is afforded. Uniform staff is working closely with the non-uniform staff in terms of, in particular, we have a challenge program, which is an interactive journal where the officer actually facilitates the group session. They're also assisted by the non-uniform staff, but this, creates a better atmosphere to try to get the inmate and the uniform staff on one accord within the housing area. So these are the things that we have been working on and have been, we've seen, a work in progress, but some success with it. Yes. Thank you.
I'd just like to comment too. I mean, that's an important point. Okay.
Have you seen, the level of violence since you opened up the enhanced housing? Is there good news here? Is there less gang violence? Is there good stuff going on there?
I think as pertains to the unit, the inmates are behaving well, the programs are having a benefit, they're participating, which is, again, these are inmates who had not participated, they were in our population driving the violence. So as pertains to the unit, yes. As pertains to open population, other than a couple of facilities, the answer is it has not had that impact at this point. So, all right. Again, we'll cover a few things. I want to cover the 14-point anti-violence agenda, talk about the cultural change, empowerment and accountability of staff, which we believe we need to substantially improve on. I'll talk briefly about the need for the rule change in a very general way, where we're at with that and what our thoughts are. Contraband findings, as Mr. Cohen pointed out, oversight of previous changes, and the overview of proposed rule changes. We also have, which I'll talk briefly about, is the GMDC accelerated model, which is already 2 weeks in the making, and I'll give you a brief description of what we are looking at for that. And we also have GRVC, which is another project we'll take on in late July, early August. So we spent probably 4 or 5 months just kind of looking at the organization, diving deep into the problem. So as the board's pointed out, we see the violence drivers, we need to really dig deep into each one of those incidents to think about what's driving those issues, and how do we fix the culture that's created there that these issues continue to surface. So in the past decade, the inmate population has shifted. Much more serious crimes, higher bails, more violence, serious felony charges, and a higher percentage of mentally ill inmates in our classification. Second is the average length of stay that we've generally reported out as 53 days. And if an inmate stays overnight in our jail, he's probably going to be with us about 176 days on average. So the thought that people stay only 53 days on average is a little misleading when those short stays where somebody's not even a day in custody and out gets factored in. The department does not understand the true staffing needs, and when I say that, we talk about we're creating these new units, and we're seeing good progress at RNDC when we increase staff to 1 to 15. So when we say staffing needs, as we create PACE units and CAPS units and other programs, the staff skill and training and numbers all have to be adjusted to the new delivery of services. So we've done quite a bit of work in enhanced supervision, as the deputy warden pointed out. Officers were trained in the program delivery. They participate in program delivery in the unit, and that's a much different role than you'd see in most of the islands. So it's a different impact for staff to really buy into the program and the value of the program. Supply distribution is, again, we've been open for a long time. But getting the products to our jails, to the end user, to the housing units, where the inmates make sure the inmates have what they're supposed to have every day. We've had serious breakdowns in that process. We can't document what went where, how much went where, and there was the amount of product and the right numbers in the unit where it's supposed to be on any given day. So we've worked very hard to develop the system and be able to track the material from the warehouse to the housing units. Housing and classification system, we've done a lot of work here, and I think the classification tool that we'll be using at GMDC in the next few weeks will be a much higher predictor of violence, allow us better separation and safer housing for all inmates and staff. And then the last thing, and this came up in the survey, is Department uniformed staff struggle to adhere to core correctional practices and consistently scored below 50% on our security audits. So we're really, for corrections or for the officers in general, want to get back to basic practice. We need to do the basic things well in order to move forward in these other areas of the programs piece well. So the things that we've done a staff survey that was about 80% participation. We get a lot of comments. I think it was 300 pages of written comments. 700 pages of written comments. And so we had a lot of information directly from staff about their perception of the problems and what we needed to do to improve on those. The 14-point agenda, I'll talk a little bit about that. The adolescent strategy, I think most of the board's aware of that. And Wynette's worked very diligently to put that in place. Enhanced supervision housing, one piece of the strategy. Punitive segregation reform, I think we've reduced the historical waiting list on that regard, and we're moving, I think, in the right direction. And agency-wide transformation efforts. So we've done 4 town halls. We have open meetings with staff, with some of them as large as 300. And I've done personally 26 focus groups, so we continually hear from our staff on what's going on, and that they have direct access to me to talk about the changes, the things I like, and the things that we can do better on. So the 14-point anti-violence reform agenda, as you see, really was the first 5 objectives was really focused on reducing the violence. So keeping weapons and drugs out of Rikers, it has to be a higher priority. It's multifaceted, so it's not just visitors. I'll explain that in a little bit. Created a integrated classification system and housing strategy that I think will get us better outcomes. Comprehensive security camera coverage. We've worked very hard to move those dates closer, so they'll be done sooner. Designed effective inmate education programs. We know programs will add for safety for staff and inmates. And redefining our first responders in our facilities. So the other initiatives will be improve leadership and development, redefine our investigative unit, develop recruitment and hiring. Many of these initiatives are already in place or started, not completed, but so we're working on many of these at the same time. So the need for rule changes. So on this one here, we looked at many options as we progress down this road of what do we need to change in order to create safer facilities. And clearly, as everyone's aware, violence is up across the board. So stabbings and slashings, 34 in 2010, 88 in 2014. Assaults on our uniformed staff went from 500 to 752. Assaults on healthcare staff went from 3 to 48. And again, total assaults from 509 to 806. So there's a, not only is it an issue of reducing violence and violence against our staff, but part of the problem is what kind of programs and safety measures can we put in place to keep our staff safe in order to reduce these assaults. It's training, it's emergency response, it's drugs, it's weapons, it's all of those things contribute to violence. So next slide here talks about the 8 things in the left-hand column are really we're on overview of contraband. Why am I on? Okay, back to this. So the 8 things in the left-hand column on the slide really are the 8 concerns in priority that staff expressed in the survey. Safety, confusion about direction, fairness and team environment, motivated but unprepared recruits. This was an issue that while we'd done a pretty good job in our training academy, the hands-on skill building of our recruit class was not where it needed to be. So all those things have been changed. Problems with management and recognition. We need to be out there recognizing the good work that our staff do every day, and also training of our managers. Strong instincts and challenge with execution, so people in general kind of know what to do, but having support and backing to make sure when they do it, they get supported. Outdated equipment and systems, that's something I think all the board members understand and see. And then consistently about all these concerns were very consistent from facility to facility and all ranks. So it wasn't like officers were saying one thing, captains another, 2 commanders. So it was consistent amongst all the ranks. And again, I've already stated that the 5 first things in our reform agenda are we believe will address the major safety concerns that our staff express. So weapons and contraband, I think Dr. Cohen talked about this, and pretty much, we've been fairly consistent. There's been some up and down to these numbers, but any amount of drugs and weapons coming into our facilities is unacceptable. Every single act has a potential to increase violence and cause injuries. So we track this fairly constantly, but the concern always is, what are we not finding? I mean, if it was a continuous catching everybody that walked in the door, people would not attempt to bring stuff in any longer, and that's just not the case. So potential need for rule changes. Contraband needs a comprehensive approach. So we look at how do we control contraband coming into our jails. We look at what we're doing with staff. So we increase our investigative staff and staff in our facilities. So at 3 facilities now, we have full-time ID investigative teams in the facilities, and they work all hours and all shifts. Improve staff entry searches and use of K-9 units. So we've also developed, we'll have 3 K-9 units assigned to the ID unit. 1 K-9 unit is weeks away from completing her training and will be on site to do staff searches. And better coordination with DOI to continue our investigations on staff corruptions. On inmates, we do better and targeted searches, meaning we have roving search teams in a lot of our major facilities. And we are looking to get to better technology. I think, as Mr. Cohen said, the body scanners are a great help in that regard. Visitors are not singling out visitors as a source of contraband. The policies that we'll implement are pretty in line with other major correctional jails across the country. And our efforts are really while balancing the need for family contact. Also, there's a substantial need for safety of our staff and inmates in our custody. Looking at currently to reduce the opportunity to pass contraband, direct illegal actions and also manage the gang influence in our jails and during visits. Along with the changes to the visiting policy, we're also committed to improvements in reducing waiting times, improving the training and steadying posts in our visiting areas, increase transportation options, so move people quicker, standardized search procedures, so we don't have the multi-layered searches that we currently have. We'll do one good search at one point, and that should speed things up. Centralized lockers, so we don't transport a lot of personal stuff onto the island that has to be searched several other times. So we try to keep that at one point, and improve the physical appearance of all of our visiting areas. So those are also areas that we think we can improve the visitors' areas. Potential need for rule changes. This limited physical contact proposed change aims to reduce the overall contraband coming into the jail, which is also a major driver of violence. And weapons and drugs or any type of contraband contribute to that. Proposed change that we'll be seeking sometime in June is slightly to limit the physical contact in the beginning. At the end of the visits, we'll have tables with asking that we have tables with small petitions to allow monitoring, better monitoring of the actual visit, and unobstructed eyesight and ability to speak without restrictions. So it's not to be a talk through, people will be able to talk directly to one another. It brings us closer to other major jurisdictions like Pennsylvania, Miami, Cook County, all areas that have either more restrictive policies than that. Current rules create a reactive response policy, only allows for restrictions based on visit-related actions or incidents. Factors cannot be used to establish a pattern or risky behavior. Proposed change provides the department the ability to deny or limit visitations based on comprehensive look on both the inmate and visitor's behavior and intent, using a range of factors related to the safety and security. Now, obviously, we would link those intel pieces to the actual activity in the visitation area. Second area we're looking at is potential need for rule change is punitive segregation overrides. Provide necessary flexibility to respond to violent infractions. Need the ability to address inmates who violently infract within 7 days of their release time from segregation. So if they owe time, they're out for 7 days, it would go back to do their time. If they infract during those 7 days, we'll be asking for an override ability to move those inmates back. We've had 1,031 inmates that have been released from punitive seg since punitive seg reforms were instituted. 50 inmates have been infracted while after being released from punitive seg, almost half infracted within the first 7 days of their release, or 2% from release of inmates. For us, it's a safety issue. We want to make sure that our staff and inmates are safe, and we can have inmates who feel immune from segregation if they continue to act violently. Internal rigorous review process on punitive segregation releases have been established, appropriate housing and classification upon release. So I think we do a better job in taking somebody who's been through punitive seg and putting them back in the population in an area that will keep them safe and our staff safe. A dedicated unit recently formed to consistently review each release. So we have a housing strategy covered by a warden who tracks all of these inmates as they go into punitive seg and where their housing is done in the future to make sure those housings were appropriate. The next request was looking at packages. We hope to...
I'm sorry, Commissioner, can I just interrupt
Sure.
you while we're on that to ask a question? Can you tell us of the inmates that have been released from punitive seg as a result of the new rules, how many of those were transferred to enhanced supervision? Because one of the bases for that is it had to be in conjunction with the punitive seg reform, because we'd still have dangerous inmates and we needed to be able to house them separately and under more restriction and better supervision.
All right. So some have, I don't have that number, we can get you that number. So some have and some are housed in other areas like NYC or facilities where we have a more restricted housing, and the cell design is a little better, but we can get you those numbers. On packages, again, we're hoping to uniform all of our inmates in our jails. We'll reduce the need for personal articles. We'd like to have any clothing delivery either be sold in commissary, where the inmate can purchase directly, or be purchased to a vendor electronically and sent to the jail. So reducing the need to carry in clothing and goods to inmates, which is another major source of contraband. Yeah, the last one on rule change was the adding a increased penalty for any serious assaults on staff. And just to give you a sense on what that serious assault is, those are where there's been substantial injury. And so far this year, we have 27 such occurrences. So it's not a big number. It's not a lot of inmates that it would be impacted, but we think the penalty for serious assaults on staff should be more severe. Talk briefly about two models that we have. We're pretty active in standing up, and one is the GMDC accelerated model. So we're actually going to test a new classification tool to see if it is a better predictor of violence in our jails. Does it make our housing units safer? And there'll be also, that will be the kind of the dry run to what we'll be doing in GRVC at the end of July, probably beginning of August. So right now we've selected a group of inmates at GMDC, all adults, 22 and over, and we're setting up metrics as we put this new tool into place and rehouse this group of inmates to see, in fact, if we can bring the violence down with better housing strategies, adding programs, improving training on our staff in the next few weeks in order to see if all those things that we believe are factors in violence will be reduced in a comprehensive way. Second model is GRVC. I think there's been some talk about closing the facility and reopening it. While GRVC will be our first full facility model, which will again be a classification and reclassification of all of our inmates, retraining of all of staff, retraining of all of our supervisors, having coaches at the high level. So we're bringing coaches to actually coach our wardens and deputy wardens, our tour commanders, captains, to actually be on site as we start this facility, again, to make sure all the things that we know have been deficiencies in time have been corrected, and we believe will be very effective in reducing violence, better trained staff, better outcomes. And when we get the evidence back, we'll probably be repeating this model several times over and over at our bigger facilities where we continue to have problems like AMKC and other places in the organization. So I think these are very exciting initiatives. I think they fit well with many of the other things that we're doing in the agency, and I believe they'll start to show good outcomes. RNDC is a good example of the facility's ability to change dramatically, both in the use of punitive SEG, but also in the attitude and performance of our officers. Those officers are much different today than the people that were there probably even 8 months ago. GRVC has done really good under the leadership of Warden Augustus, and their violence is down substantially. And we believe these other add-ons will just help us in that regard to get the violence to the lowest possible level. So it'd be great to have no violence and no contraband, but at this point in time, I think our efforts are in the right direction. Yeah.
Any questions?
So I, like other members of the board, have concerns about the proposed visitation changes. Since I've been on the board, there have been a couple of occasions where the department has looked to other jurisdictions, other jail systems that are providing more effective services in a certain area. You mentioned that the proposed changes bring you more in line with certain policies of other jurisdictions. But what I'm not sure of is whether or not those jurisdictions, those systems are more effective with respect to reducing violence and bringing about the changes that we desire. So I'm curious to know whether or not it's just that you're bringing them more in line, or these are the more effective systems when it comes to reducing violence.
Okay, fair enough. We'll definitely ferret those things out. We've also, in the last few weeks, we've had communication with Cook County and LA County. They want to have at least meetings probably every couple months where we'll all go to a central location and get very similar problems in all three systems and really sit down and talk about what's working for them, what works for us. And so I think you're absolutely right. Looking at those things that are working for them, not just as a different idea. So thank you.
Commissioner, as you roll out this very ambitious program, which I commend you on, I think it's terrific, you anticipate having to acquire additional staff, or do you anticipate having, in terms of numbers, or do you also anticipate acquiring additional or different skills to actually implement and succeed with this?
Yeah, well, definitely different types of staff. So we're in the process today of hiring 20 correction counselors, which will be working hand in hand in the housing unit, delivering programs and providing services right on site. So actually with the officers. We used to have, I believe somebody said we had in a neighborhood of 100 and something correctional counselors in the system. Today we got, I think, 16. So a really key function to do the program delivery, but also to offer any, the connection with the outside. So if an inmate's got a problem with a family, they would be the hands-on person to really make that connection for them.
And these would be people who are currently not employed.
Currently not employed.
Right.
And we also rewrote the job description. So we have a few now. Most of those correction counselors work in offices. They provide some services. We're talking about a different role. They actually work in the housing units with the inmate, actually deliver programs, and also also help in any way they can.
Thanks very much.
Dr. Cohen?
Yeah, just a few questions and comments. I mean, one of your last points was that the very serious injuries were 27 in the sort of this period since January. As you're aware, the number of very serious injuries to correction officers decreased 40% from a comparable period last year. So the effect of the punitive segregation reform, which did release people from, has been associated with a decrease in the number of serious. And every one of those incidents is horrible, and I'm not disagreeing with your categorization of them as serious, but it's important to note that the number has decreased of late. It is not increasing. So we'll have to sort of be concerned about the logic of changing the policies when they appear to be working. I wonder a couple of questions. Are you projecting a decrease in the population on Rikers Island as you go ahead with all this programmatic stuff? The city has has identified a program which it says will decrease the population 25%, which I think is a start. I think the number, we should look for doubling that. When you talk about all these people serving 1 days, which are a lot of people, that's a huge amount of room for decreasing the population. But so I just wonder what your projections are, if that's important, for your budget. What else you've changed? Because I really didn't see in the program. If people are there for a half a year, which is what you're saying, on average, then they should have jobs. Then idleness is an overwhelming issue, not just a horrible, a horrible issue. So I wish you could comment on that. And then last, I would just like to complain on behalf of the board, or at least on my behalf, and on the behalf of people who come to these meetings and are concerned about the practice of the Department of Correction, that you have not given us this petition yet. I just think it's completely unfair to the community and to the board for us not to be provided with this petition, so we'll have time to review it carefully. This has happened previously, and we really should see a document, with court counsel's, redlining process, so we know what we're talking about. I don't know what we're talking about in terms of limitation on visits based upon your presentation. I mean, I don't think you're not trying to fool me at all, but you just haven't provided it to us, and we've been asking, and the mayor announced it, you announced it in March. So why have we still not gotten it? Why don't we have the chance to analyze it?
I'm going to interject there,
Yeah.
if I may. So commissioners are very powerful people in the great constellations that exist, but they are not all powerful. And these petitions need to go through different levels of review that are independent of the commissioner. So we are not acting on anything today, and our next board meeting is not until June 9th. So I remain optimistic that we will receive something soon that will enable us to reflect and consider judiciously and to have the benefit of substantial community and other interested constituency participation. I hope that I prove to be correct.
If I may
I
add,
just,
I'd like to
I did
think
want to
that-
answer Mr. Cohen's
Let me
question.
just say, I'd like to think that the thoughts and the comments that are being made, matters that you've heard, concerns that you've heard throughout this process, will be reflected in the petition writing in the petition that ultimately is presented. So I'm hopeful that the delay is in part due to, further consideration.
Thank you. I just want to answer the question on programs. Programs are valuable. Idle time is a problem. As we are standing up this model at GMDC, we're adding substantial numbers of programs to the housing units. So we believe that's also not only just classification, retraining of staff, and all those other things, but the program piece is a real key piece of getting the violence down. So we agree.
Just one additional question, comment. I assume, or you would not be talking about, Commissioner, the projects that are online for this summer that seem to offer so much promise, and the look that you are taking, the hard look on the visitation process as a whole, that the city, separate from the department, has offered up the resources that you need. I assume that's the case to accomplish this, or you would not have been talking about it.
And that's correct. And I've been clear with the board that our officer staffing, while the city has given us ample increases in staffing, our ability to put people in the door, get people in the door is a little bit hindered. We've added a pretty substantial improved screening process. We got about 370 officers in training today, and that's barely going to keep us even. We hope to run a class of 600 in August, and we'll begin to now see the impact of the added head count. But as of today, they could give me 100 more positions. I couldn't get them in the door on that regard. So it takes time.
Please.
Yeah. And I should say, I know we've had a lot of meetings, and you've certainly been discussing it generally with us in terms of proposed visiting regs. But I'm going to express my concern as well, and just ask that maybe you and the team of lawyers working on this consider this. There's obviously concern that the proposed regs might be overly broad, not narrowly tailored, and certainly seem punitive to all of the inmates. And we know for enhanced supervision, the board had rejected the visiting that had been proposed at that time. This is somewhat revised. It's not as harsh as what had been proposed. But I would just ask that you consider looking at the fact that you have the ability to make individual determinations, whether perhaps proposing some rule change to those individual determinations to broaden that to cover maybe a larger portion of inmates that are really, really presenting the danger, whether that might not be sufficient versus across the board blanket for all inmates.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. We hope to have a lot of dialogue with the board and advocacy groups as we roll these petition out, because I think at the end we all want safe, secure facilities. We want it safe for our staff and our inmates, and that's our goal. So I think we look at things in the same way. And what are the high-risk areas? What areas do we need to control? What areas would it be over-controlling? So we look forward to that dialogue.
Commissioner, I was hoping that we would have time for you to just briefly describe some of the work that the department's doing on FRIA.
Hey, I have one question.
Oh,
Sorry. A lot's been said about the visitation. There's a lot of work that has to be done, and I look forward to the discussion. But a couple of folks have mentioned the assaults on staff and correction officers. We know that there are also mental health providers, civilians,
Yes.
Healthcare professionals. I'm really interested, not right now, I'm really interested in understanding this because I think it makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you. So on PRIA, there was a grant applied for before I arrived here, and we actually started down that road probably ahead of most large jail systems in the country. The group that's working with us here in New York actually was working with me in Maine. So they were doing their PREA assessment in Maine when I was there, and showed up here in New York to start that process here. So I don't know if we want to invite Andy Moss up, who's the lead on the group that's doing that assessment, to talk about PREA.
Let me solicit some, can we take a few minutes, do you think, to hear from, yes?
Yes,
Please.
okay.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Board. I've enjoyed listening to the issues because our approach to PREA has long been that, yes, it's a federal law, but the outcome we're after is sexual safety, and sexual safety is certainly a part of overall safety. If you have sexual safety, you have physical safety and emotional safety. So all of these issues are very related in terms of really looking at a systemic approach. Just briefly, I'm Andy Moss with the Moss Group. The Moss Group is a consulting firm located in Washington, D.C. My own background is I've been working on sexual safety in confined facilities for 25 years, formerly with the National Institute of Corrections, developing many of their strategies nationally. And so we are working with a number of grants around the country. We're the primary provider of technical assistance for the National PREA Resource Center and have worked in over 400 sites implementing PREA. I'm very happy to be working with Commissioner Pont again. As I mentioned, we worked in Maine for assistance there in implementation. I think for your purposes, just to know real concretely what we're doing, we were successful in the departments receiving this grant. We have 3 primary strategies that are loaded with lots of subsections. But the first thing we do is take a baseline assessment. We've been in 7 facilities this winter. We've spent the winter with you here in New York. A couple of broken bones from our consultants on black ice, I think, but we've completed our assessments. They're very thorough, comprehensive assessments where we look not only at the PREA standards, but also look at leadership and culture so that we are having some assessment about whether or not it's a reporting culture, if it's fear-based or if it's hope-based, and there is reporting going on. So it's a very comprehensive assessment. We are working on our analysis of all of that data right now. It's quite a bit. Our next step is a report to the department with recommendations that are consistent and integrated with the PREA standards. Our second strategy is strategic planning. We don't just hit and run and identify the issues, but we walk with the department towards compliance, and we'll work with a strategic planning process that will, the outcome and goal is PREA compliance for the agency. So that will begin after the report is reviewed. The idea is to prioritize the standards and the work towards sexual safety with the department and work through that process in an organized strategic planning effort. And again, integrating with other efforts going on with the department, the youthful offender, what's going on there. I enjoyed hearing your comments, Judge, about that. And to your example, too, a number of things that we can do are short-term wins. They don't have to be high cost. They can be a lot more about communicating, about working on policy that's already in the works, working with investigative practice, and really assessing those very operational issues that are consistent with a lot of what's going on. And our third strategy is to really thoroughly review all the training that staff have that really engage and support sexual safety, to provide guidance and best practice around the training, and to help implement training with strategies such as train the trainer, and really look at both pre and post test in terms of are we getting where we really need to be with the training. And I will say that all of this is within the window of 15 months that are left on the grant. So we have a lot of work to do. We're really looking forward to it, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I just want to say this is terrific news. I'm really, really delighted to hear that you're working with the department and that they brought you in and they're so open to it. I'm very optimistic. Thank you.
I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about it. It was a couple of years in the making to get this grant, and I appreciate that the department hung in there and persevered. And we have a roadmap. We know what we're doing. We recently completed this process with the DC jail, and they're now PREA compliant. We've done some work with the LA jail and continue to do that. So I'm very hopeful about the process and about the commitment the commissioners made.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner, I think you have some action items. No.
Good morning. I'd just like to request to continue the variance, some previously approved variances that we had. So we're seeking the continued variance of the commingling of the adolescent, city sentence adolescents with the detainee adolescents that are in DC. Also the punitive segregation inmates to wear jumpsuits. The personal hygiene for suicide marks, for allowing inmates to wear suicide marks and be issued the suicide blankets. And also for the West Facility Communicable Disease Unit to a variance from the congregate recreation variance. And we're also seeking one new I don't know if you want to vote on those. I have a request for a new variance. So.
No, we'll separate that from
Okay.
the existing variances, which have some history here. So before there any discussion, can I hear a motion?
Move the item?
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion?
Yeah, I would just say one thing, since there is a petition that you'll be bringing for rulemaking, this may be a good time to consider incorporating the sum and substance of what's in the variance in the petition for rulemaking so that it can be reviewed by the board, go through a COPPA process, and because many of these have been long-term,
Yes,
and
we
so
are
it really
considering
should be
that,
part
yes.
of regulation. So I'll
Yes.
certainly do it this time, but I'd like to see that in the petition for rulemaking.
Okay.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judge. Mike?
Move the item?
All those in favor? The question's been called.
Aye.
Thank
Yes.
you very much.
Thank you. So one of the new variances that we're requesting is to commingle the pretrial and sentenced inmates pregnant sentenced pretrial and sentenced pregnant inmates at Rose M. Singer. We feel this to do that would be beneficial to both populations to reduce the potential of infectious disease, especially for influenza or the outbreak of chickenpox and such. So to keep both populations out of general population and put them together.
So once again, I'll ask for a motion so we reserve Robert's rules
So
of
moved.
order.
Second.
Okay, discussion?
Question, I thought this has been practiced for a while, and that the board has allowed the department to put this group together because they're limited capacity in the nursery, which isn't being used much anyway, but there's in the dorm for pregnant women. So this has not been the practice?
I will double check.
I think it was allowed, it somehow lapsed.
There
I
are two
think-
variables also at play. There's pretrial and sentenced, and then there's adult and adolescent. And so my understanding, I'll have to check, is that we've traditionally cohorted one group in Rosie, and so this will allow for like cohorting, basically allowing for both barriers to be bridged, but we have small numbers of pregnant women that we want.
Well, let me just clarify. We have an expert in PREA, so we may need to consult her on this if that's your request. Is it city sentence and pretrial adults that's 18 and older? Or are you also asking, because I didn't hear that in your description of the variance, are you also asking to commingle the adolescents with the young adults and adults?
Right now, we're not asking to commingle the adolescents and the adults.
So I'm certainly in favor.
Okay, can we call the question here? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank
It's
you.
passed. Commissioner, is there anything additional?
I don't have anything additional at this point.
Any other questions for the Commissioner? Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
The Department of Health and Mental Hygiene update?
Good morning. I'll be brief. I wanted to provide just a couple of program updates on some of the programs that we've talked about in previous meetings and also in some of the smaller task force meetings that have been very productive in the last 2 or 3 months. So first, just to reference the great leadership of Deputy Commissioner Saunders and also Judge Hamill, we have received from OMB support, I don't have the final numbers, but for a real expansion of programming for young adults. And so there are 3 parts to this, and this is really bringing the level of service to this population that we think is needed and we haven't had in the past. So first, it's to have dedicated psychiatric care, so dedicated adolescent psychiatrists for the young adult group, which we've always had for the adolescent group over at RNDC, but now that these young adults are in a different facility, it'll support us having a real dedicated psychiatric approach that's relevant to this patient population. It's very different than the rest. The other is to develop substance abuse programming for this group. As you know, we have some innovative substance abuse programs in the jail setting. We don't, however, have any that are specifically for this cohort. And substance abuse diagnosis is not only the most prevalent type of diagnosis, it far outpaces traditional mental health diagnoses. It also accounts for the dramatic rise in mortality for people coming out of jail, including this jail system, and people coming out of prisons all over this country. If you look at the rise in mortality in the weeks after jail and prison, and we validated this data here in New York City, it really is most linked to substance abuse, overdose deaths. And so the extent to which we can link resources to the most prevalent problem among this population and a population that's actually linked to increased mortality, we think that's really important. And then the third is we've secured funding to roll out some art therapy and other non-traditional modalities for therapeutic interactions with the young adults. We found in the CAPS unit that while it's important to have the talk therapy, the groups, and the individual therapy, the groups, for those of you who have been on the CAPS unit and the PACE units, you'll see that the art therapy is among the most popular things there. And so rolling that out for this young adult cohort is also important. So those are the 3 things that we've secured funding for. We'll have the specifics for the OMB commitments in the coming weeks. So that's the young adult update for us. The CIT, crisis intervention, it's one of the measures. There are several measures where DOHMH, in collaboration with other agencies, including DOC, receive funding from the Mayor's Behavioral Health Task Force. We're going to be testifying about that over at City Council a little later today. But crisis intervention teams, that's a specific area where we receive support to staff up crisis intervention teams that'll be both DOC staff and also health staff that are trained together and designed in a program so that in jails that have a mental observation area, in jails where we have behavioral health issues where we would expect that there are going to be concerns, instead of sending a probe team, a real classic security response, to a setting where there's a patient in distress or having a problem, a crisis intervention team will roll out. So that will start this summer. So in June, we have a training resource identified in Minnesota. Both DOC and health staff are going to be going to get their training there. They're going to come back, work on a train the trainers model, so that in June, July, we're going to be rolling this out in AMKC, the biggest jail. And then we'll populate those crisis intervention teams across the department wherever we have these mental observation housing areas. The PACE units, these are the really innovative approaches to bringing a much higher level of resource to the mental observation houses. So there's lots of acronyms here, but basically we have about 20 settings in the jail system that are called MO houses or mental observation houses. These are places where we think we need more resource for people with some mental health issue, and so we bring them to these housing areas. We traditionally have struggled to get enough staff into there and enough programming, and so the PACE units represent a commitment to bring very high levels of staffing, of programming, but also a really innovative approach to those housing areas. Those housing areas, just like the CAPS unit that kind of presaged the PACE units, those housing areas, they start off with a community meeting in the morning, which is the closest thing I think you'll find to restorative justice in this jail system, where security staff, health staff, and patients sit down together and they start the day together. They get their gripes out. Also, these units have treatment aides, which is a different level of mental health staff person, the kind of milling around, helping people, getting them to groups, finding out who's doing well, who's not. So we have 2 of these PACE units that are very successful, rolled out. One is for people that have come back from Bellevue Hospital, and so those are the sickest patients, and that unit is very successful at AMKC. Second unit that was opened, GRVC, is for people that may be on the way up, that may be decompensating and may be looking like they might need hospitalization. We plan to open the 3rd PACE unit in June. And this will be what we call a diagnostic unit, and this is a feature of most big mental health systems where there are a small number of patients we're not sure about that we need to actually take much more resource-intense, focused look at and think about what are the core problems. Sussing out mental health versus substance abuse can be tough, so a diagnostic unit allows you to do that. The third PACE unit will be such a diagnostic unit. We've never had that resource in this jail system. There's a fourth PACE unit that we have money for that we plan to roll out over the summer. I think that PACE unit may open a little later in the summer or the fall, pending the commissioner referenced the potential closure or changes at GRVC, because GRVC is the site of the fourth PACE unit, so that may get pushed a little bit, but we're planning on that opening relatively soon in either way. I think that those are the main program updates. I think we also want to mention the pre-arraignment screening. So for the first time, correctional health is actually going to be involved in the pre-arraignment screening process. This is a process that happens today in all 4 central booking places, where before people go to see a judge, before they get arraigned, they have a very brief screen that happens with FDNY EMTs. We have for years wanted to be part of this because for the third of people who come to jail, and hopefully fewer, but for the people who are jail-bound, it's critical that that information that's gathered in that quick screen come with them and help us expedite literally life-saving care in the jails. So we're going to start a pilot later this month whereby we'll have a higher level of staff, nurse practitioner, and also a PCA who's a lower level of staff working. They'll take over 1 tour a day from the EMTs.
This is really a good idea.
And they'll be, so for us, the reason our skin in the game has always been that we want to be there to find the people that are sick so we can take better care of them the second they hit the jails. The city's support of this, however, and the support of the FDNY and NYPD has been our strongest partner in this, is that this is one of the natural points for diverting people away from jail, because not only are we going to be there with a higher level resource, we're going to be there with our electronic health record. And so most of the people coming through have been in jail before. The discharge plan we just did 2 weeks ago or a month ago will have that access to that information. And for the judges that are going to see these people in 6 to 8 hours when they go to get arraigned, we can have an alternative disposition thought up. And so by the end of this pilot, we'll have worked with partners in city agencies, but also a lot of partners that are there in the court buildings in Manhattan now to think about alternative dispositions, and so planning out how could we do the diversion. And then the final program update for you, I mentioned last time we were here, we're working very closely with the Department of Correction on reforming the restrictive housing units, using data as our primary source of accountability. We would say that, while PACE units and CAPS units are working and we have data to support it, I think we all agree that the restrictive housing units are not working. We're going to push off implementation until, because the RHUs, we have 2 RHUs at GRVC, and so I think that just like getting the 4th PACE unit open may be delayed over the summer, I think that implementing a new approach to RHU may be delayed. I think that we do have shared agreement on several important principles, and one operational aspect that we're working on right now is we on the health side, everybody agrees that people with serious mental illness should be going to the CAPS units. They shouldn't be going into a solitary setting. So we are working on the technical capacity for us to notify the Department of Correction whenever we identify somebody as being seriously mentally ill. The reason that's important technically is it means that when that person ends up having an infraction down the road, all of the work that goes into figuring out where are they going to go could be helped. It doesn't mean that review necessarily would stop, but all of that work could be helped by corrections knowing automatically that somebody is seriously mentally ill and they should be bound for the CAPS unit. It's very analogous to what we do with heat sensitivity. This is the time of year where every intake, everybody comes into the jail, we review who meets heat sensitive criteria, and then we're notifying corrections every day who are the people who are heat sensitive. So it's very similar to that. But the overall implementation of the restrictive housing unit reform, I think we're still working on. We don't have the final plan. I think we'd like to sit down with you all to discuss some of the key elements that we agree on. And then I think also there's the issue of the GRVC, what goes on there with the custody management plan may impact changes in that unit.
Thank you.
So the RHUs, you told us that you're, I'm sorry, you told us the RHUs that you've been engaged in the plan for a long time to try to improve this. I'm concerned that these are dangerous units right now, that there's a high degree of violence that's going on there, that men confined to these units in ODCC and RHU are at risk because they actually don't have access to mental health services. Mental health services aren't going there. When they go, they're just going cell side. There's no confidentiality. There is not officer staff to bring people to visit. So they actually have less men, even though they're identified as being mentally ill, and they're placed in this special unit for people being fractured. They're actually being cut off from mental health services to some extent. At least that's what it looked like to me. And the violence data that you and the department have provided to us suggests that these are very dangerous units. So what's the interim plan to ensure the safety of this population?
So I think one thing we've been engaged in with the Department of Corrections is to aggressively review who can leave these units, because one of the traditional problems has been that people get onto these units because the units they were designed with a program approach that spans 6 to 8 weeks if you go through the various levels. It was very frustrating, and very few people made it through all those levels, even if they stayed in jail that long. So we're in a new era now where people are not being in these types of units for more than 30 days, and many people have actually infraction lengths that are much shorter. And so we're engaged with corrections about reviewing who can get off of these units. And then, what we're trying to do on the mental health side is really rethink what is it that what are our stated goals in a 2-week or 3-week interaction with somebody on a unit. And so I think that, we're the harm reduction approach that we're taking right now, because I think you're right that the data suggests that these units, we have worse outcomes. The harm reduction approach for us is to make sure people are getting their clinical encounters out of the cell to the extent possible, working with the local security staff to secure escorts for the groups. We have staff available and working to provide the group therapy, and in some settings that's happening quite reliably, and others, it's more of a struggle. But I completely share your, we've analyzed that in doing an evaluation of the CAPS unit. We've not just looked at how successful the CAPS unit is, but we've looked at the patients who have been both in CAPS and in RHU, and they're actually quite a few. And of those patients, for the patients while they're in CAPS, their rates of self-harm are dramatically lower than they are when they're in RHU. So we're acutely aware that these units, we don't get the clinical outcomes we want. We're working very aggressively to come up with a plan to reform them. And in the meantime, it's our obligation to work as hard as we can to get people out of their cells for their clinical care.
Thank you.
So something for us to keep an eye on in the Violence Committee.
Stan?
Yes, please, Mike.
The take a victory lap on this one. The central booking is an issue that I was looking at 15 years ago at the fire department. And to have the access to, and EMT did a terrific job, right? But to have the access to the health records, to have a higher level of medical professional, you're going to save some people's lives, you're going to prevent some suicides, you're going to do extraordinary work, and you should take a victory lap.
Well,
it's a big deal.
Thanks to NYPD, when I started in this position, it was a Lieutenant Corbett, a close friend at NYPD, who was really the champion of this. And so what we find all over this city is that there's an appetite to reform this process for lots of different reasons. And so while it's a little bit like walking into the Balkans and saying you have a better idea for how to do things, we're very confident that it'll be better for our patients, which is ultimately our main concern.
I just want to thank you. I think you really brought us terrific news across the board about the young adult programming, the PACE units, and then this pre-arraignment assessment is just terrific, and work's being done on the RHU, and hopefully we'll hear some more good news on that front as well. Thank you.
When are you going to tell us about your new vendor?
Well, we have a board meeting in June, and I think that, as the mayor's office has said, there's a very intense ongoing review of all aspects of the health service, and I would not shine the light on any one part of it. I would shine the light on myself, my staff, everybody who's involved in healthcare and the jail system. We need to, account for how we're doing things and do it better.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. So that brings us to the public comment period. I will note that at the conclusion of that period, there will be an executive session of the board to go over personnel matters. So I have a list from the Public Advocate's Office, Amanda Masters and Michael Sazakis. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Good morning. My name is Michael Choskis. I'm here on behalf of the Public Advocate for the City of New York, Letitia James. I'd first like to thank the board for allowing us to comment in public on our petition. So we believe that the CAPA process should begin now. I'd like to take a moment to address the processes of the Board of Corrections. The city charter vests the Board of Corrections with obligations to promulgate rules. We have petitioned the board to promulgate rules that would better protect vulnerable inmates from sexual harassment and abuse. A yes vote today on our petition would merely have started the City Administrative Procedures Act, or CAPA process, a process by which the community, experts, advocates, and agencies, as well as the affected community and the public, would have the opportunity to present information for this board to consider. Hearings would have been scheduled and fact-gathering could have been commenced. On behalf of the Public Advocate, Letitia James, I would urge to get started on that process now and to vote yes at your next board meeting. While we wait, people here are being harmed. The Department of Health and Mental Hygiene has reported to our office that there were 116 acts of sexual abuse reported to a medical provider in the calendar year 2014. That does not include acts that may not have been reported to medical. We have no information about what became of these complaints, nor do we know how many were investigated, nor the outcomes. Department of Corrections has refused to provide our office with data on any allegations that the department has received, or anything that the Department of Corrections Investigations Division has done to investigate complaints, as well as any information on rates of substantiation. Corrections Department and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene must share information with each other to ensure that inmates are being protected and that oversight mechanisms improve. The Corrections Department can no longer ignore requests from the Public Advocate. The board should also be concerned with the lack of transparency from Department of Corrections around this issue and the serious harm that inmates report to their health providers. And lastly, the city charter mandates that the board issue rules to protect inmates. The city charter makes clear, and I quote, "The board shall establish minimum standards for the care, custody, correction, treatment, supervision, and discipline of all persons held or confined under the jurisdiction of the department," end quote. There is no doubt that the city charter obliges this board to make rules that protect inmates from sexual harassment, abuse, and assault. In fact, the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA as we know it here today, imposes very similar oversight mechanisms. They are just not easily enforceable in our city jails. That is why the board must engage in rulemaking. During the rulemaking process, the board can control the scope of the rules it considers and can solicit information from all interested parties and experts. The failure to vote yes to commence that process today is disappointing, and I would urge the board to put this up for a vote at the next meeting in June. Thank you very much.
Just comment something on there. Just thank you very much for coming and speaking to us. I just want, especially for my newer colleagues on the board and the public, to know the Department of Justice and their investigation and report, where they found the civil rights violations, did suggest that the PREA should be an area that the board consider regulating for lots of reasons. One, to make it enforceable, but two, because even notwithstanding the best work of this current administration, when the administrations change, then some of those policies and practices could be undone. So to make sure that it's really sustainable and enforceable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to working with the Public Advocate in the coming days, as well as with the City Council, and as we've heard earlier today, with the department to move forward on this very important subject. I want to note that we expect the comments to be no longer than 3 minutes. Tanya Krupat of the Osborne Association.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today, and thank you, Dr. Cohen and Judge Hamill, particularly for your remarks regarding visiting. We see visiting as a violence prevention strategy and much more. My name is Tanya Krupet. I'm the Program Director of the New York Initiative for Children of Incarcerated Parents at the Osborne Association. The New York Initiative is a statewide policy reform effort launched in 2006 to improve the lives of New York's children who have experienced the arrest or incarceration of a parent. For the past 16 years, I've worked with and on behalf of children whose parents are in jail or prison. For more than 10 of these years, I've visited Rikers weekly as a service provider. My focus over these years has been reducing the harm of separation for children and their parents, mostly through visiting as a key intervention that is largely misunderstood and underutilized and has numerous positive benefits for children, parents, correctional facilities, public safety, and reentry. Last week, a letter signed by 17 organizations, including Osborne, was submitted to the members of the board, making a strong case for not moving forward with the department's recommended changes to visiting, and we thank you for posting the letter on your website. Complementing this letter, it's important to remember the actual people and lives that are being affected by visiting policies. Young people couldn't be here today because they're in school where we want them to be, but they have a lot to say about visiting. One young woman wrote, "Coming from the perspective of a child, my mother is incarcerated and has been since I was 4. All we have are visits to look forward to. Those visits where she can touch me and physically be there. When you're not able to be tucked in at night with the person who gave life to you, it has an effect. My mother is still a human being. I yearn for her touch, to see her smile. I am what keeps my mother sane, out of lock, and any other trouble they can cage her for. Her words of wisdom and knowledge also keep me out of trouble." One of the young people in our Youth Action Council told us how the visits from him and his brother kept his dad sane and calm during his incarceration. It helped him deal with the various stressors he faced. A grandmother in our program visited her daughter on Rikers frequently, often bringing her 2 young grandchildren who cherished the precious 1 hour or less with their mother. Under the proposed restrictions, this grandmother would likely not have been allowed to visit due to her own previous criminal justice involvement. We agree that reducing violence on Rikers is essential and urgent. However, visiting could be part of the solution instead of seen as the root of the problem. We actually recommend improvements to visiting, such as training for corrections officers and interacting with the public and being more sensitive to the experiences of children, shifting the culture to see visitors as helping to maintain safety and calm within the facilities. Capitalizing on the important opportunity that the department has to create positive relationships and associations between people in the community, including children and those in uniforms. We recommend creating or better utilizing existing children's areas within visiting rooms at various jails, and adding more information for visitors to the DOC website. We call on you not to approve any changes to the minimum visiting standards and to strengthen visiting, viewing it as a violence prevention strategy that it can be when smartly utilized and combined with strict contraband procedures that do not unfairly punish the majority of visitors. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration.
Thank you. Jane Stanicki.
Thanks for pronouncing my name correctly. I'm Jane Stanicki.
That's the first one I did.
I'm an advocate with Our Children. We work with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and their children. For about 10 years, I've been going to Rose M. Singer on a weekly basis. I want to make 2 points. First is the proposed regulation regarding no contact visitation. It is just absolutely anti-family. As it is, young children, like everyone else, sometimes wait 3 hours or more before their visit actually starts. To then limit them to a quick hug at the beginning and at the end of their visit really contradicts everything we know about building family relationships and maintaining them. 60% of the women or more at Rose M. Singer are mothers. More than that, they are there for largely nonviolent offenses. Often they already, feel guilty about having to visit with their children when they're in jail. This policy would serve to pile on the guilt. If we want to make the experience of incarceration even more destructive and to put additional stress on already strained families, this would certainly do it. We believe that the proposed no contact visit policy is ill-conceived and should never have been articulated and certainly should be discarded. Secondly, we strongly endorse the commitment to enforcing PREA. Rape is probably the most underreported crime in this country, and the absolute one-sided power within the jail system makes it really important that we enforce it. Lastly, a note of praise. The current warden at Rose M. Singer, Michelle Clifford, is doing an absolutely excellent job, and we fervently hope that DOC does not continue their rotation system with no regard for superior managers who really do understand the difference between women and men. Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret Ravenhorst.
Hi, good morning. My name is Margaret Roundhorst, and I'm a resident of the City of New York and a recent volunteer and supporter of the NGO Our Children. And at their advice 3 months ago, I put in an application to become a volunteer at Rikers Island, and I haven't heard a word. I do periodic phone calls and emails to follow up, asking if there's any additional information required, and I haven't heard anything. So this is, I think, a simple matter, but I'm just wondering if it's possible for me to get a pass at some point, because I'd like to help. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who has been waiting for a pass for some time. Thank you.
So perhaps there's someone here who can talk with you about this problem. Okay. So, effective testimony. Dory Lewis, Prisoners' Rights Project and Legal Aid Society.
Thank you. I'm here to speak in support of the Public Advocate's petition for rulemaking and to urge that its proposals in fact be strengthened. Yesterday we provided the board with a fairly lengthy submission focusing on the sexual abuse of women prisoners at Rose M. Singer by male correctional staff. In it, we recounted some of our clients' descriptions of their sexual abuse they experienced there. It was persistent, it's recurring, it's horrific, and it's an open secret. In our submission, we also talked about how sexual abuse is different than other kinds of abuse and violence, and that it does take clear and specific rules in order to address it. And one of the main reasons that that is critical is because sexual abuse, as the previous speaker alluded to, is substantially underreported. It's underreported in the community generally, and it's certainly underreported in jails where the fear of retaliation is stark. It's also exacerbated for women prisoners who have a substantial history of sexual and physical violence before incarceration and who thus feel shame and complicit in the abuse that they think they've allowed to occur. It's also underreported because the likelihood of them being believed is unbelievably low, and the risk that they will be punished is high. That feeling of futility that prisoners experience about reporting is not in their imagination. As was also referenced before, New York City has not shared the substantiation rate of the allegations of sexual abuse, but New York State has because of the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and the substantiation rate in the last publicly available data is 2% of staff sexual abuse allegations. There's no question that clear rules and strict enforcement can go a long way to substantially reducing sexual assault. And for that, we commend the department and Ms. Moss for working together. But that's clearly just the beginning. For the reasons that Judge Hamill just alluded to, it's critical that the board adopt rules concerning this area so that sexual abuse will finally be reduced in the city jails. We urge that the board not turn a blind eye to this issue, but in fact, take steps as quickly as possible to promulgate meaningful rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Skylar Albertson, the Bronx Defenders.
Good morning. My name is Skylar Albertson. I'm here today representing the Bronx Defenders. I'd like to speak briefly to call the attention of the board to significant unresolved issues in solitary confinement at Rikers. And my comments are mostly directed towards CPSU, but I believe they apply to solitary units generally, punitive segregation units at Rikers. And these are unresolved issues that are ongoing right now as we speak. So the 30-day limit that went into effect earlier this year is certainly an improvement upon past practices. However, it is also still true that people in solitary face extraordinary challenges each day. They are still unable to access outdoor recreation on a regular basis. When they are able to go outside, it's still in very small cages. They're still routinely denied access to showers, phones. There's still, at least in CPSU, essentially zero programming. Many people in these units still receive so little food that they experience significant weight loss. And many have access very rarely to mental health counseling that goes beyond very brief cell-side chats. And the board is familiar with many of these issues and issued reports such as the report on barriers to rec at CPSU. And I applaud the efforts of the board that have been discussed earlier today to enforce the minimum standards. So I would suggest that moving forward that the conditions at CPSU and other solitary units should be an area of renewed focus for those types of efforts. I'd also like to briefly call attention to the DOC's discussion of overriding some of the new limits to terms in solitary and perhaps going back to longer sentences for assaults on staff. And I would encourage the board to view these requests with a high level of skepticism, and I would suggest that any individual whom the department feels needs to be in punitive segregation for an extended amount of time is probably someone who would benefit more from intensive mental health treatment than from prolonged isolation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Comment just on that last question. I thank you very much, and I think your point about serious mental health treatment for that small population of people who were sentenced to hundreds and thousands of days and or were previously is important. And the other question which I've asked the department is what is EHS for, if not for some part of this population. Thanks for your comments.
Nick Kincaid or Kincaid of the Sylvia Rivera Law Project.
Good morning. Thank you for taking the time to hear these comments. My name is Mick Kincaid. I'm the director of the Prisoner Justice Project at the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, which we refer to as SRLP. And we strongly recommend the implementation of the petition by the Office of the Public Advocate and the Legal Aid Society's Prisoners' Rights Project's comments on that. And if we're allowed to, we'd like to submit our own comments before the end of this week. There are many people here who are able to speak about the petition as a whole, but SRLP is an organization that's based in providing leadership and legal services to transgender, gender nonconforming, and intersex New Yorkers, so I'm going to restrict my remarks to that population. Although, of course, the petition by the public advocate would affect all people, and TGNCI people are affected by this, even if we're not specifically named. As some brief background of the knowledge that we bring to this, SRLP provides legal services to about 300 to 400 New Yorkers every year. Our estimates are that 66% of them are in prison or jail or on probation or parole. And the populations that we serve are 95% communities of color. So we know that the intersection of race and gender identity leads to an overrepresentation of transgender nonconforming and intersex people in the jail system. So we have a very strong knowledge for our comments. That someone is awaiting trial or has been convicted of criminalized behavior does not take away the inherent right to gender self-determination, nor the corresponding right to be free from sexual violence, including harassment and invasive searches. Cameras and stringent policies may be part of the solution, but we need to be aware that the DOC has had a policy of zero sexual violence for many years without meaningful results. Too often it is assumed that the conditions of incarceration are the punishment for criminalized behavior. This is not and has never been the case. Ending sexual violence in New York City's jails must begin with the notion that the people in detention or who have been convicted of criminalized behavior are human beings who have knowledge and awareness of their own bodies and what has happened to them, and are in the best position to make determinations for their own safety. For TGNCI people who are in the custody of the DOC, it is vital that their opinion be the main determination point as to where they are housed, who searches them, what they are called, and other life-altering determinations. No one is better able to determine their safety than them. At this point in time, we have heard some positive feedback about the creation of the Transgender Housing Unit, also called the THU. And the main takeaway is that it is entirely possible to trust that TGNCI people know what their own safety is and are able to access that. And we've also learned that it's entirely possible to train or hire DOC employees who are able to use the correct names and pronouns and to perform pat risks appropriately and to generally behave at what we have as a minimum standard for employers, public servants, and others outside of the jail context. For folks who are not in the THU, whether it's because they've deemed themselves safer elsewhere or because it was not made available to them, they continue to report sexual violence, including sexual harassment and improper searches, on the same horrific levels as always. It becomes impossible to report these concerns to any staff or volunteers within the DOC when, as has already been mentioned by many other folks, sexual abuse is seen as part of the punishment, and they are seen as being complicit in it because of their own identities. So to this end, we also want to oppose any lessening of or further barrier making around the visitation processes. Visits are vital spaces to show that people who are incarcerated or detained have not been forgotten. A visit sends a reminder that this person is cared for, is loved, and is a whole unique being, including but also apart from their current incarceration, and is a chance for people to reconnect, share, and be inspired by their loved ones. It also serves as one of the very few opportunities for an individual to share an experience of sexual violence, knowing that the person they're speaking to wholeheartedly believes them and is going to behave in a respectful manner towards them. There are populations for whom the increased vigilance and awareness of vulnerability may begin to create de facto solitary confinement, and one specific population would be transgender women between 16 to 17. In these instances, SRLP stresses that no one should be placed in solitary confinement, even if it is ostensibly for their own protection. There is overwhelming evidence from multiple sources at this point that solitary confinement is torturous regardless of the alleged reason, and creating a situation where a person is effectively preemptively punished for their own identity by being placed in a solitary-like confinement is not a proper response to sexual violence, and in these instances, these individuals should simply not be held by the DOC. SRLP also strongly endorses the suggestion to provide for outside advocates to offer trained, meaningful, and diverse counseling after an incident of sexual violence is reported. We know from our clients and members that people identified as LGBTQI disproportionately experience sexual violence, and outside advocates will be uniquely positioned to bring in cultural understanding of those realities. And finally, I want to make SRLP and the knowledge base of our members available as resources to shape these decisions as they progress. No one knows better than those who have actually experienced sexual violence how to implement life-altering change. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kelsey De Avila, Brooklyn Defenders.
Hello, my name is Kelsey D'Avila. I'm a social work intern with Brooklyn Defender Services. I visit our clients incarcerated on Rikers Island on a weekly basis. Originally, I felt the security and wait time for a counsel visit was intrusive. That is until I decided to experience the process of family visits. I visited on a Thursday, and as someone who had never been through the visitor center before, I didn't know what to expect. There was no clear signs directing you which line to wait in, what you should have ready, or even what next steps would look like. You're required to go through 3 checkpoints when visiting someone, and you can expect a wait time of 3 to 5 hours for a 1-hour visit. I was told to leave everything in a locker, yet I need 50 cents for the 2 lockers I was about to encounter, which DOC does not warn you on their website. At the first checkpoint, I was asked to take off all layers, my shoes, and walk through a metal detector while my stuff went through the x-ray. I was then required to check in according to the jail I was visiting, have my thumbprint and my driver's license scanned. I proceeded to wait for the shuttle when the K-9 unit came through, and an officer told me to remove everything from my lap, my pockets, put my hands to my side while he went through my belongings. When I was dropped off in front of the jail, I repeated the process, and this time there was a machine set up to wipe my hands for any chemical residue. It took 1 hour to reach the second checkpoint and another 2 hours before I sat down with the person I came to see. There's no signage about expectations, and the officers wouldn't inform me why it was taking so long. In the third checkpoint, a private area was created by a pulled screen. I was told to take off my shoes for the third time, turn my socks inside out, pull up my sleeves, use my thumb to move across the inside of my pants, lift up my hair, open my mouth, and eventually bend over and lift up my bra. By the end, I felt exposed and humiliated. When I was cleared, I was told to wait again. Overall, it took me 5 hours of waiting and security measures for a 1 hour visit. Throughout the entire process, I witnessed several families with children. Children were patted down, invaded by dog searches, and were relentlessly waiting in lines. Visiting someone in Rikers is both psychologically and physically demanding of children and adults. Barriers and obstacles associated with visitation may further undermine any therapeutic value of visiting for family members and could potentially exacerbate loss-related trauma. For family members, friends, and loved ones, visiting across a barrier is very different from and more painful than having a contact visit. Although DOC proposes a 6 to 8 inch barrier, there is a full barrier to a child. Children need to be able to hug their parents and sit close to them throughout a visit, and not just when they arrive and leave. Children will not understand why they cannot touch their parent, sit on their parent's lap, or be held throughout a visit. Touch is concrete and is perceived important for maintaining bonds between children and their incarcerated parent. We must not forget that family members are continuous active agents in the rehabilitative process for incarcerated people. Yet we currently don't consider the reluctant harm that limited contact visits can have on an incarcerated person and their family. The push to target visitors as the main source of contraband is ill-conceived. Taken from the 2014 Department of Investigation report, a large proportion of contraband is carried out by uniformed guards and civilian employees. Families should not be punished when there is no correlation that families are the cause of illegal trafficking and source of violence on Rikers Island. The proposed changes to visiting would likely deny, delay, and reduce the quality of visiting and risk exacerbating violence by further isolating people from their loved ones in the community. We need to focus on making visiting more welcoming and child-friendly, not intrusive, dehumanizing, and traumatizing. People incarcerated in New York City and their families need support, not added isolation from each other. Our system already situates families in difficult emotional and stressful situations. Let's not add to the pain that family members are already faced with. A barrier that prohibits meaningful contact is not the same as providing the space to connect and visit. I urge the board not to accept the proposal on visitor restrictions, and thank you for your consideration on this important issue.
Thank you very much. Riley Doyle Evans.
Good morning, everyone. I'll try to keep this brief. Riley Doyle Evans with Brooklyn Defender Services as well. First, I want to thank a couple of folks on the board. Bobby, I want to thank you, Dr. Cohen, for your comments about process and the importance of engaging advocates in the community and incarcerated people and their families in this discussion about how we move forward to finding solutions. No one knows better about their safety than the people who are actually there. So we hope that the department will consider your comments when they go forward. I also want to thank you, Judge Hamill, for taking such an involved approach with dealing with the issues at GMDC. And thank the department for resolving some of those issues. However, I want to state that our office is really disturbed that all these things were happening without the knowledge of headquarters. And I think it bears consideration by the board and by the department. How we approach violence at the department is not really in tune with what's happening in the jails, with their staff, with their leadership in each of the jails, and their own approaches to violence, which actually really harm people and probably lead to escalating violence. I would encourage you to actually look at the ADSEG units throughout the system, in addition to the ones that you visited at GMDC. We've received reports from Brooklyn House that people are being required to wear uniforms, and that they're being denied their personal clothing when they appear in court. When people appear in court in jumpsuits, the judge naturally thinks that they've done something wrong or there's some special consideration for them, and in fact it has negative outcomes in their court appearances. So we'd ask you to continue to pay attention to those places, not just at GMDC, but throughout the system. With regard to the PREA initiatives, we support the public advocates' efforts, and as we stated in our letter to you, we'd appreciate your special consideration, in addition to the legal aid comments and the public advocates' efforts, of people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. These are a special population that deserve our attention and are common victims of this condition. finally, I'll address the issues that have already come up about solitary confinement. The statistics offered by the department suggest that only 25 people are re-infracted after they're released during the first 7 days out of solitary. If the census is as low as 30 in each of the ESH units, I can't imagine why else we created these units other than to house those people. An approach that embraces overrides can only have an end game that warehouses people in perpetuity in isolation, and we all know that we need treatment and not isolation. It's not a solution. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Leandra Khan, New York Civil Liberties Union.
Good morning, and thanks for your time. My name is Deandra Khan, and I am an organizer at the New York Civil Liberties Union. The NYCLU and many of the advocates here have been closely following recent initiatives that the city and that the Board of Correction have undertaken to reform Rikers Island and to address rising jail violence, including the mayor's 14-point plan, changes to solitary confinement, and the creation of enhanced supervision housing units earlier this year. Too often, these major proposals involving rulemaking and amendments were introduced in a confusing and hasty manner, leaving the public in the dark for too long on issues that impact them and their families the most. We thank the board for beginning to be more deliberate about this, and we urge you to transparently and independently exercise your oversight authority, particularly regarding the visitation restrictions that may be proposed by the DOC, which run counter to the goal of reducing jail violence, given the great benefit for visits for incarcerated people. Furthermore, during the board's rulemaking earlier this year, such restrictions were proposed but rebuffed, and enhanced supervision housing units were created to manage the jail's most challenging individuals. We urge the board to first deliberately follow through with its oversight of ESH, including ensuring that individuals are appropriately screened for placement and have access to rehabilitative programming before considering punitive measures like restrictions on visits. Finally, we urge the board to initiate rulemaking that would actively improve the lives for individuals on Rikers, many of whom suffer needlessly from the well-documented culture of brutality. The public advocate's petition aligning the board's minimum standards with PREA is a much-needed first step toward deliberately addressing the issue of ongoing and unaddressed sexual assault on Rikers, and we urge the board to open up a larger discussion on this with the petition. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Evelyn Litwack of the Jail Action Coalition LGBT Working Group.
Good morning. My name is Evelyn Litwack. In addition to being a member of JAC, I'm also on the Criminal Justice LGBT panel with the Bureau of Prisons, and more importantly, I'm formerly incarcerated. When I listen to these conversations in this room, it strikes me that there's a voice that's missing. You know, we talk and we talk. We have a conversation, but there's a conversation we don't have. And the conversation we don't have is that of 10,000 people in Rikers that are incarcerated, I don't have the exact number, but 70% are pretrial, and more than 50% are there because they couldn't pay less than $3,000 in bail. We are incarcerating people that are not guilty or not been guilty of a crime, and we are exposing them to a culture of violence and separation from their family. And the conversation we're having is how to restrict, protect officers, but we're not having a conversation about abolishing bail. We're not having a conversation about getting these people out who don't deserve to be separated from their families in the first place. And that's what's disturbing to me. Also, what's disturbing to me is PREA, which has been a law in this country for 12 years, and we're still having a conversation about going in and trying to find out what is the problem. There is no zero tolerance. It doesn't exist. So we have a law, like many other things, that aren't real. I was in prison. I was in 2 women's federal prisons, and I can tell you from firsthand knowledge that 20 of 21 male officers were sleeping with 4 to 6 women in the prison, and nothing was being done about it. The odd and because I'm part of a community of formerly incarcerated people in this city, and talk to people who are formerly incarcerated from Rikers, from state prisons, and other people who are in prisons, I can tell you firsthand, it's not a little problem. It doesn't need to be studied. It's a big problem, and it's something that needs to be stopped immediately, and it can be stopped by the commissioner by putting his foot down and forcing something to happen instead of spending the time trying to stop a child from hugging a parent. This is more important an issue to stop something like this. And that's all I'll say for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lillian Rivera, Community Disability Activist.
Hi, good morning, Board and Commissioner. Good morning. April, just give me a minute. I apologize. April 24th was one of the most devastating days. I was addressed by an officer, CO officer by the name of Bell, and she addressed me like this: "Hey you, hey you, hey you." When I turned my back, she stated, "Go to the office, the front desk." I went to the front desk, and I was told that she had allegedly stated that I had disrespected her. Today, before all of you, I emphasize that that is not my style of disrespecting officers. I do not go to Rikers Island to disrespect officers. I go to Rikers Island to see my fiance, which is incarcerated. I also have a chronic illness. I've been punched in my knee. Words cannot describe what I've been subjected to at Rikers Island by Officer Ward and Officer Bell. I want the abuse to stop. They are targeting me. They are labeling me. And I've been going to Rikers Island since April 15, and it started in the month of March, when I was sent home merely because I signed the paper for them to waive my rights, because you either damn if you do or damn if you don't. If you don't sign the form, they won't allow you to get a visit. They send me home. And because I took my time, because as you can see, I'm physically challenged, they threatened me. You either hurry up or you're gonna get locked up. Now, I was told by CO officer, Woods, which is a wonderful, ethical, professional officer, that I couldn't return back that following Saturday. When I returned back, then they stated to me that I couldn't. They were talking to me in an aggressive fashion. Officer Gary was talking to me in an aggressive, yelling at me, creating a scenario. There are problems, Commissioner. They are extremely harsh problems at Rikers Island. Visitors are treated like inhumane. I personally am testifying today, and I can state to you, Commissioner, that there needs to be supervision there. There's no one to supervise how the visitors are being treated. I am one. I'm testifying today. There is a major issue. The way I was treated, no human being should be treated like that. Then what happens with the Disability Act? To reasonable accommodation, waiting hours on end, leaving me for last because I'm Lillian Rivera. Yes, I am assertive. Yes, I get results. However, I am a human being, and I don't treat anyone with disrespect. And I do want to mention that Officer Bell and Officer Ward have made my life a living hell. A living hell. And no one should be subjected to that. It's dreadful for me to go to Rikers Island to visit.
Thank you, Ms. Rivera.
You're quite welcome, sir.
I appreciate, the board appreciates you taking the time to testify.
Thank you.
Obviously, we cannot look into this ourselves, but I will ask that the department, the Commissioner's office, take a look at what has occurred with you and report to the board as to what is found and the disposition.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. That concludes the business of the board, except for an executive session. But before I seek a motion for executive session to discuss a personnel matter, I want to take one moment to thank Mr. Richard Wolf, who has been filling in, that is an understatement, in support of the board in the absence of a filled executive director position. Frankly, I could personally not have made it through the last 2 weeks of this of my life without his help, support, and guidance. And I know I speak for all the members of the board in appreciation of his efforts. So, publicly and for the record, Richard, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks very much. May I'll entertain a motion for.
So moved.
Second, we're in executive session. Can we shut? Sure.